London, autumn 1888. The fog clung to the narrow alleys like a living thing, curling around lampposts and swallowing the glow of the gaslights. But in Whitechapel, it wasn't the fog that kept people inside after dark. In just 10 weeks, 5 women were butchered with precision. The killer left no footprints, no fingerprints, no name. The world came to know him as Jack the Ripper. And yet, more than a century later, certain details buried in dusty police files might finally tell us who he really was. Whitechapel was not the London of carriages and ballrooms. It was overcrowded, filthy, and desperate. The smell of sewage clung to the air. Drunken arguments spilled from taverns. By night, the dim glow of gas lamps barely pushed back the darkness. Every shadow seemed to move. The people here worked long hours for little pay, and many women turned to the streets to survive. In this fragile, dangerous corner of the city, a predator hunted with surgical precision. Mary Ann Nichols was the first. Found in the early hours of August 31st, her throat cut, her abdomen mutilated. Just 8 days later, Annie Chapman met the same fate, her body left in a backyard off Hanbury Street. Then came Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, murdered on the same night within an hour of each other. The press called it the double event. Finally, Mary Jane Kelly, found in her small rented room on November 9th. Her murder was so brutal that even hardened detectives were shaken. All 5 killings bore the same signature and something else: knowledge. Whoever did this understood anatomy, knew where to cut to kill quickly, and where to cut to horrify. This was no drunken street thug. This was someone who had practiced. The police were overwhelmed. Whitechapel's maze of alleys made it easy for a killer to disappear. Witness descriptions were inconsistent. A tall man, a short man, a foreign accent, a dark coat. No one saw enough to be certain. Then the press received letters. One, signed Jack the Ripper, taunted police with details supposedly only the killer would know. Another came with a small box containing what appeared to be a piece of human kidney. Were these real messages from the killer, or the work of a cruel prankster? Scotland Yard never proved they were genuine, but the name Jack the Ripper stuck. Over the decades, more than 100 suspects have been named, but 3 stand out. Aaron Kosminski was a Polish-born barber living in Whitechapel. He was mentally unstable, sometimes violent, and known to carry a long-bladed knife. In 2014, modern DNA testing on a shawl allegedly found at one of the murder scenes pointed to him. The problem? The shawl's chain of custody was never verified. It might have been handled by dozens of people over the last century. Then there was Montague Druitt, a barrister and schoolteacher. His suicide in December 1888 coincided with the murders suddenly stopping. Some police officials quietly named him as their prime suspect in private notes years later. But there was little physical evidence, only suspicious timing. And then there's Dr. Thomas Neil Crean, a trained surgeon and convicted poisoner. He had the skill, the tools, and a violent history. Officially, records place him in prison during the Ripper murders. But some historians argue those records could have been falsified, or that he had been released earlier than documented. Part of the reason Jack the Ripper was never caught comes down to the time period. Forensic science was almost non-existent. There was no fingerprinting, no DNA analysis. Detectives relied on eyewitness accounts, and in Whitechapel, witnesses often feared speaking to police. Crime scenes were contaminated by curious onlookers before evidence could be collected. Investigators from different divisions didn't always share information. By the time suspects were identified, leads had gone cold. And then there's the possibility that the truth was buried. Some believe the killer was someone influential, perhaps even connected to the royal household. If that were true, would the police have dared to expose him? Theories about Jack the Ripper's identity range from the believable to the bizarre. Some think the murders weren't the work of a single man at all, but of several killers whose crimes were lumped together. Others believe the Ripper was a police officer, able to walk the streets at night without suspicion. And then there is the idea of Jewel the Ripper, a midwife or female killer who could move about covered in blood without raising an eyebrow. The 2014 DNA test on Catherine Edoshaw reignited the Kosminski theory, but the results were controversial. Critics pointed out that DNA can degrade over time, and that contamination could have occurred at any point in the last century. Still, the possibility that a living descendant's genetic code could connect back to the Ripper sent shockwaves through the true crime world. But even with modern science, no single theory explains everything. Kosminski fits in some ways but not others. Druitt's death is suspicious but unproven. Cream had the medical expertise but not the confirmed timeline. Each theory leaves unanswered questions, and each suspect has defenders and detractors. What we do know is this: it has been 137 years since the fog rolled over Whitechapel, and the Ripper walked its streets. Somewhere, in a forgotten archive or a private family attic, the truth might still exist. A letter, a confession, a photograph, something small, waiting to connect the final dots. And maybe that's why Jack the Ripper still haunts us. Because he's not just a man who killed 5 women. He's an empty space in history, a shadow we can't fill in. The mystery is part of his legend, and the legend has become larger than the man. So I'll ask you this: if we could know his name tomorrow, beyond all doubt, would you want to? Would the truth satisfy us? Or would it take away the very thing that has kept this story alive for over a century?